Hi all, my name's Adam Klempa. I'm recording this for TC&J's Global Ed Fest 2023. Little disclosure, re-recording this because I never hit the record button when I actually had the audience. So there's not going to be an audience here or unfortunately a Q&A period. But let me go ahead and talk to you a little bit today about RPGs and their role in developing social skills in the middle or high school classroom with a particular focus on autism spectrum disorder and social emotional learning needs. So a little bit about myself. I've been teaching for about 18 years. I started in California at Berkeley High School just for a year before I went on to found a charter school in the San Francisco Bay Area called Leadership Public Schools Hayward. I then started to move abroad and start my career at international teaching at the American College of Sofia in Bulgaria, and I've been at the American School of Paris for the last 12 plus years. I've been playing role playing games for almost 30 years now, and I'm currently the head of the role playing game club as well at the current school as well as at my previous schools as well. Beyond just gaming, I also like to coach sports, baseball, softball, soccer, basketball. I've coached them pretty much everywhere along the way as well. So gaming is really sort of a part, sports, the team interaction, the competition, the collaboration. That's really a lot of what I do, and I like to consider that it infuses a lot of my teaching as well. Topics of this presentation, we're going to cover a little bit about the program I run. The program is called Level Up ASP, and this is what I want to talk to you a little bit about today, what it is, what are its goals, give you some context if you're not familiar with some of the acronyms I've been throwing out there so far, especially RPG, ASD, and SEL. I'll cover those very quickly. And then why games? What benefits can we derive from games, from gamification, from gamifying things? Why role-playing games specifically? And then what is Critical Core? And just I'll give you a heads up that Critical Core is a product I use as part of the Level Up ASP program. I'm not affiliated with them. They're not paying me. I don't have any association with them. I just found their product, used their product, really like the product, and would like to share it with you today. Talk about some of the challenges of getting a program like this set up at a school, some of the impediments to that implementation, and then some definitely the successes, what's working, and why I feel so excited about sharing this with you today. So first questions, what is Level Up ASP and what are its goals? Level Up is a program that I created. It's not an international thing. It's not, I came up with the name. I started this program. I thought it was a good idea. Because the goal of it is to support students who may not otherwise find support systems in the school. So the Level Up program is an after-school activity for 5 to 7 students, and that number kind of matters. Less than 5, and it can be done without a problem, but it's not as enriching. And more than 7, you actually have too many people to allow everybody the opportunity to develop the skills that you hope they will, and really get the spotlight and the opportunity to develop the skills. So 5 to 7 is a really good number. So 5 to 7 students to develop educational and social skills through a tailored version of the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing game, short for RPG. I started this back in a couple years ago. This is be my 3rd year running it. My first year I did it in the middle school, and mostly because that's where they'd let me do it, and they were middle school kids, and middle school kids are kind of up for anything. And I had a small group. I had a counselor with me. The focus was on students with ASD and SEL needs, so autism spectrum disorder and social emotional learning needs. And the goal was to focus on social skills. All of my students in that group were neurodivergent, and with most of them with ASD. And it was very successful. I got really good feedback. It was a small group, I think maybe 4, and I really wanted to have it maybe, in that 5 to 7 range. So the following year, I brought it to the upper school. At the upper school, however, there were some challenges there. In implementing it in the exact same way that I did in the middle school. So I had to make a couple of adjustments, which I actually feel are just as valid and work just as well. In the upper school, I didn't have a counselor with me at this point, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But instead of the focus on just on social skills, I reworked the focus to be about transferability of social and educational skills, specifically those 21st century skills that we hear a lot about and are kind of buzzy in education, but I actually really think are super important for beyond the classroom. I'd say half of my students at this point were neurodivergent, and half were not. Half were not. They were just regular students. But as I'm going to talk about, everyone can benefit from this program, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But ultimately, a few years ago, maybe about 7 years ago now, my school opened its doors. The American School of Paris opened its doors a little bit wider to invite more students in that we hadn't classically invited in. Students with more learning needs, students with autism spectrum disorder, usually highly functional, but the students that probably wouldn't have been at the school prior because it's kind of a high pressure school. And as the schools started to change, we noticed that, well, we're offering more learning support services. I just noticed there were a number of kids who they didn't need the academic learning support, but they could use some social support. And that's why I started this program. And a couple of years ago, my school created its DEI guiding statement, and I'm a big believer in this. I'm a strong believer in this. And the aspects of the DEI statement that I feel really apply to this program are the school's commitment to honoring diversity and inclusion, really making sure that every student feels included. So we with a lot of learning support programs, you're really getting those students with academic needs really feeling like they can be successful in part of the classroom. What about the social needs? What about the emotional needs? The school also has a focus on enabling the full potential of all students to contribute and benefit, and we want people of all identities across cultures, genders, sexualities, and in this case specifically abilities, religious affiliations, and other lines of difference to feel a deep sense of belonging and acceptance. And that's really what this program is all about. So the goals of the program are to provide a safe, fun, interactive role-playing game experience in which students can level up 5 personal or interpersonal skills that can be leveraged for success both academically and socially. And those 5 skills are self-regulation, collaboration, planning, perspective taking, pretend play, and these, you'll notice, anyone can benefit from these. So while the program is open to all students, as everyone can benefit from these skills, the version of D&D used in the project is designed specifically for students with ASD and SEL needs. So what I've done is taking this program, which this product I'll tell you a little bit about later in the presentation, called Critical Core, that has a focus on students with autism spectrum disorder and social emotional learning needs. But these are its 5 values that it really tries to get students to really develop and really to use my nomenclature, level up. And you notice that anyone can benefit from those. So when I brought it to the upper school, I opened it up a little bit to not just students with ASD and SEL needs, but to any student. I'm still getting students with ASD and SEL needs. They really do benefit from this program, but other students are as well. So RPGs, what are role-playing games? If you're unfamiliar with role-playing games, you're not alone. They're sort of experiencing a resurgence at the moment, sort of a new renaissance. Dungeons and Dragons is probably the most familiar name in the role-playing game, so you probably heard of that. But what role-playing games are collaborative story building. That's really at the heart of it what it comes down to. You have one person known as the Dungeon Master or the DM. They act as the narrator, and then they play all the characters that aren't played by the other 5 to 7 people at the table. So they describe the situation. They inhabit the people that the players run into. They essentially are the world. They're the narrator, and then everybody else at the table are the main characters in the story. So this is where it becomes collaborative, because what you'll have is the Dungeon Master who will describe the situation. Maybe he'll say, "Oh, the players are walking down a path in the woods, and a young boy jumps out of the bush and says, 'Help, help! My cart's overturned. My father's pinned underneath. Please come help him.'" And then asks the players, "What do you want to do? What do your characters want to do?" They respond by deciding, "Well, I don't know, we'll talk about it," and then decide, "Okay, we'll go help the guy. We'll go help the cart and find the cart and help the guy trapped underneath it." And then that's their decision. They tell that to the DM. Then the Dungeon Master decides what outcome comes after that and describes that outcome. So maybe he says, "Oh, well, when you get there, you realize, oh, that cart's been there a long time. It's kind of covered in grass and vines, and you feel like maybe you've been deceived. And when suddenly 3 guys step out from behind and ask you for your money, and then you cycle back to the beginning." And this description, response, outcome, description, response, outcome cycle, that's the building of the story. It's very interactive. There's a lot of creativity. It's very free-flowing, and it's really a ton of fun. I've been doing this except for almost 30 years, and I love it. It's constantly fresh. It's constantly new, and students get an opportunity to come up with crazy ideas, give them a try, come up with new characters, give them a try, new personalities, new interactions, and it provides a safe space for students to sort of explore a variety of different perspectives and personalities, planning opportunities, and in a way that, if it falls apart, it's just a story. But if it works, it's a lesson that they can draw with them as they go outside of the outside of the program into the classroom. All right, a second acronym that may be a little thrown at you I'm not quite clear on is ASD. ASD stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability where there's a triad of impairments. So we see an impairment in social communication, social interaction, and social imagination. And it is a spectrum because although individuals will all, with ASD will suffer from difficulties in all three of these areas, it varies widely, and no two people will have the same difficulties. So the sort of running line in the ASD community is if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because everybody who has ASD experiences it in a different way. So getting to know each individual with ASD is really important, and this game really allows for that opportunity. This program allows for this opportunity. There's a term that used to be used very commonly, but is less and less commonly used now. It's Asperger's syndrome. Asperger's syndrome is actually just a part of the autism spectrum. It is currently estimated that about 1 in 100 people worldwide have ASD. That's from the World Health Organization. So if you have more than 100 students in your school, there's a good chance that at least one of them has ASD. Most likely high functioning ASD. And so this gets to the sort of spectrum itself. There are 3 functional levels of autism. Level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is usually students who require some level of support. They maybe have difficulty initiating social interactions, or they have problems with planning or organization at times. They may be very high functioning. They may be very, actually very intelligent and very capable of passing the academic aspect of class, but really struggle with the social interactions. When you get to a point where where the student is requiring more substantial support, that's level 2. So you'll see the social interactions tend to be much more limited to very narrow special interests, and behaviors often become restrictive or even repetitive, and that student may struggle to function in a normal high school, or they may need some extra assistance in order to do so. When you get to level 3, people with level 3 ASD usually require very substantial support. They have severe deficits in verbal and nonverbal communication. Their actions and activities become narrowly focused, and there's usually some distress when they change behaviors or they change focuses. Most people with ASD wouldn't be able to function in a school environment without significant support, if at all. Level Up ASP, the program, is focused on just level 1 students. There are wonderful programs for level 2 and level 3 ASD, but this is not one of them. This is for higher functioning people with autism, SEL needs in a academic environment. And so really that's sort of the focus of this. Only because that's what we have to. Trying to hit all 3 would be a near impossibility. So with the focus here on just level 1, often a lot of the questions I get then is, well, do you need a counselor or do you need support with you in the program? And the answer to that question is actually maybe. That really all depends on the teacher's experience working with people with ASD, the functional level of the students with ASD, and maybe a personal experience with specific students in that case. So I've been working with students with ASD for most of my career. In fact, my very first year, I was pulled aside on day 1 and was told, I have a student with what they were calling Asperger's back then. Are you okay with that? And I didn't even know what that was. So I was like, of course, yeah, sure. And I had to learn very quickly how to support students in a very specific manner. But you have to do that with all your students. That's sort of the goal here. So if you have a very personal experience with specific students and you get on well, they might function really well in your program if you start something like this, even without a counselor support. It may also come down to just school policy. Some schools may require, because you're working with students with ASD, if that's the focus of your program. Like I said, initially that was just the focus of my program, and so I did have a counselor in the room. Since I've opened it up, I have not needed a counselor in the room. I feel very comfortable working with students with ASD. There isn't a school policy in place that is mandatory, and I do have the to support, and so it all works well. But if your situation is different, you certainly want to check into these aspects before deciding whether or not you need a counselor with you in the room. I will say this, having had a counselor in the room at times, it was wonderful. I never felt that their counseling background was entirely necessary for playing the game, for supporting these students, but having another grown-up in the room and bouncing ideas off of them was certainly beneficial. Okay, what are SEL and 21st century skills? These are very buzzy in education, but worth digging into. SEL stands for social and emotional learning. These are the skills that we kind of expect students to pick up along the way, even though we don't necessarily explicitly teach them. These are things like managing your emotions, learning to and working towards achieving goals, feeling or showing empathy, building supportive relationships, being capable of and actually making responsible decisions. And these skills centered around developing an identity of the individual. I find that oftentimes we expect students to come in with all of these things sort of developed or to pick them up along the way. And there are some who just don't. And we don't necessarily, I find in a lot of schools, explicitly teach them. Maybe that's getting better. But this program is designed specifically to help students work on these particular skills. And it does a really, really good job in certain aspects, especially building empathy. As you're building the story, I said that you have the description and then the response and then the outcome. At any point in this cycle, you can pause the story. So, stories are built around conflict, and in role-playing games, there's some conflict that the heroes usually have to go and resolve, but at times it requires them to understand ways in which a person is struggling and ways in which a character is limited and having to overcome that as part of the challenge. So at any point, you can pause the story and talk about that need for empathy. If you found yourself in a situation where you needed help, and how did that feel, and what did you do, and maybe you're feeling that now, and how can that, what are some steps you can take to really identify with others or to ask for help. So it creates these safe distance situations where you can actually examine the situation. The player may not be in need of help at that moment, but their character is. And so they can project that need, that empathy onto their character or maybe another character, but still having that safe distance because there isn't that specific need at that moment. It's just their characters. Along with empathy, you have perspective taking. Again, having a situation where you've created this character and this is their background and this is how they tend to think, which may be similar to the way the student thinks, or it may be different. Maybe they're trying on a new personality. What did your character do? Why did they do that? How did they come to that decision? Forcing or encouraging rather students to take a perspective that maybe they're not used to taking, and exploring that can also help connect back to that empathy. Teamwork is a huge part of the game. Most of the challenges that are brought up in the game require teamwork to come together, share their skills, and to overcome the challenge. And so, coming up with a plan, an organic plan, something that is where people are talking about their strengths, talking about their weaknesses, and talking about how they can support one another. And then regulation. And this might be one of the most important ones, is this idea of regulation, because students all want to talk at the same time, especially when they're younger and they have the idea and they want to share it. And a lot of students especially have that impulse control, whether through SEL development or ASD. I'll be honest with you, I teach ninth graders, they all have some level of impulse control. Requiring them, encouraging them to take a step back, take a breath, listening to others, pause, not rushing into the spotlight, not rushing into the lead, but also finding a moment when it is appropriate to do those things. And like I said, at any moment you can pause the game and examine these decisions. As far as 21st century skills, or these transferable skills, role-playing games are just awash with these 21st century skills. Number one, creativity. I mean, it is all about, the game is played in the mind. The description, the story building, the response. You can bring out little pieces in a little map and draw some pictures if you want, but the game is really played in the mind. So students, you are constantly using their creativity, and they're constantly coming up with new ideas to solve the challenges and the puzzles and the problems in the game. So it is just a gold mine of opportunity for creativity. Strong emphasis on communication and listening, because they are a group, because they need each other to get together, and because they need each other to survive and complete the task. they're encouraged to sort of listen to one another, hear each other's voices, and then for my more timid students to speak up and voice their opinion, because they often have great ideas. They're just too shy or timid. But in a small group environment where they're encouraged to support one another, they really do pause and ask each other questions and listen, especially around the collaboration and planning piece in order to do problem solving. And all of these things are skills that we want our students to learn and develop, and we put them in groups and we expect them to work on them, but we don't really support them very well. So here's an opportunity for students to, in a very safe environment, very fun environment, work on these skills, and they find that the better they get at these things, the better they do in the game. So why games? What benefits are derived? Why role-playing games specifically? And then what is critical core? So let's start with just your favorite memory of playing a game or sport. If I asked you, what is your favorite game? What is your favorite sport? What's your favorite memory of those games or sports? The truth is most people would probably say, fun. It was the fun, the stress release of hanging out with people, playing with friends, having a good time, but also connections. Connections become a huge part of the aspects of games, right? If you've ever played sports or been on a team sport, as an athlete, you know that the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, but sharing that victory, sharing that defeat with others, coming together, bonding as a team, and really seeing the strength in the group. And games do that as well, not just sports. Games do that as well. A lot of games are very team oriented. The team wins or the team loses, but they work together. They build that connection. There's more to just this, however. The military uses games for strategy development, for critical thinking. There are certainly aspects of therapy that can be done in games. There's an increasing number of role-playing games being played in prisons because they offer an escape and an opportunity to create characters with different drives, with different motivations, with different who may make a different decision, and it gives people the opportunity to reflect upon decisions they've made and how they might do it differently. I was listening to a podcast just last week about a game of Dungeons and Dragons that was being played on death row, and it was the only opportunity these guys got to interact with other people, and it gave humanized their experience and gave them an opportunity to reflect on the decisions they'd made and how they would do it differently. Games are also really good at team building, especially if you've got businesses are doing this, schools are doing this. We send our ninth graders off to a ropes course, and they have to support one another in trust falls and stuff like that, and they come back having made some friends and seeing each other more as equals rather than as separate little islands. So that really team building aspect is super important, and games are really, especially cooperative games, are really great at building team building. Now, why role-playing games? So there is a lot of value in role-playing games. Aside from hitting all of those things I just talked about, role-playing games can go a lot further. They can build a situation where there is much more inclusion, much more acceptance, much more safety, but also all of the skills we've talked about encourage creativity and empathy. This is a short little video here, and it's just going to talk a little bit about some of the experience people have with role-playing games, and then at the end it's going to introduce the product I use called Critical Core, and I'll talk more about that at the end here.
About being included and being liked and being, finding people who like the same thing as you. So why would you not accept somebody who likes the same thing as you just because they're different?
Since I'm newer to the game as well, I thought for sure, if I haven't already been playing for 30 years, right, I'm not allowed to play. And then through Nathan and Joe and some people that I knew that were in it, they kind of coaxed me in slowly, and I realized that I was completely wrong in my preconceived notion about that. And maybe I would have been 10 years ago. But for right now, it has been nothing but welcoming.
It's not surprising that people are drawn to this game. What may be surprising is that for many, it's become a therapeutic tool, teaching social skills to children, helping people in prisons, and even serving as an escape for people in the military.
I do a lot of USO tours, so I travel all over the world saying thank you to the men and women protecting our country. And I've been in multiple deployments where, because people now know I'm part of the community, come up to me dude, we're running this campaign in the middle of a war zone, or you're protecting our country, and there are days that it's down, you don't go to a movie, you're forward deployed, so it's awesome.
With Dungeons and Dragons, it's everyone together, and we're all working together for a common goal.
Sure, you're playing a character, but when people discuss their characters around the table, they don't say, do you remember when our group of characters went and did this? They say, hey, do you remember when we did this?
D&D and other role-playing games allow people to create characters that are more like who they want to be, and as such kind of learn what steps they can take to go that direction. Create someone entirely different from who they are, and learn empathy and connection.
There's that old idiom that you can't understand somebody until you walk a mile in their shoes. Putting yourself in a different mindset other than your own, it can really open up empathy and understanding.
I actually run a game at home for my son and a bunch of his friends, and my son is on the spectrum. And it became pretty clear to me after a few games that he was very, very engaged with it. It definitely seemed to have something like a therapeutic payload. And so then when some friends of ours, the Adams from Game to Grow, they're therapists, they put together a Kickstarter.
Critical Core is specifically a version of a role-playing game designed for children with autism. It's a whole curriculum as part of an adventuring storyline, and with expandable aspects of it. It's really, really cool what they're doing with it.
Is there anything you think about the mechanics of the game itself?
I think that it's that getting into the practice of sharing the space and sort of like passing the microphone back and forth and making sure that like the spotlight is on one person at a time is actually very, very good training for conversation.
In one of my homebrew groups, we have a teenager who's on the autistic spectrum. He gets told no so much in his life that he's doing things wrong or that he needs to settle down or be less. And we all get told some of that to some extent, but I think it's all he hears. To see him get so excited when he would have these wild ideas, but then get told yes, it really was eye-opening to see that.
There are kids that are stuck in the hospital for months at a time, and so I went and I ran an adventure for Pittsburgh Children's Hospital. It's amazing watching the kids jump out of themselves and into another character. They got to leave their own troubles and bodies behind. I think it's like an incredible tool in that way.
Right. So that is very anecdotal, but there's an increasing research that shows that role-playing games help create more empathy, more creativity, more perspective taking, and more social skills. And that's ultimately the goal of my program. And in getting this program off the ground, I did a ton of research and found that more and more studies are showing that these things are really part of and baked into the role-playing game experience. And the truth is, the research is getting bigger and bigger every year. In fact, I'm not doing justice here. These are just some of the sources I used when just doing my research. But at any given point, this is much, much broader. And it just keeps growing every year. More research is showing that the value of role-playing games and building these skills is genuine, and it's there and can be very helpful for students. Now, the product that I use, I mentioned, is Critical Core. They talked a little bit about it in the game and how it's designed for students with ASD. Critical Core is a fantasy role-playing game, so think Dungeons and Dragons or Tolkien, elves and dwarves, magic, things like that. It is a modified version of the current 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and so it's very accessible. This is probably one of the most accessible role-playing games or iterations of this role-playing game. It's certainly the most popular role-playing game out there right now, and so it's actually quite accessible even for people who've never played it before. It's the model for Critical Core is built on the DIR floor time model of therapy for working with people with autism spectrum disorder. So it has therapy philosophies theories integrated into the game itself, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second here. Because what it does is it focuses on these core capacities, these 5 core capacities that it really encourages the players to develop and work on. And these core capacities are pretend play. So imagining the world, imagining what it could be, imagining what it takes to get it there. Perspective taking, as I mentioned earlier, seeing people as separate from ourselves, but still being able to connect with them, build that empathy. You're playing a character, so you can look at it from from their perspective. Your friends are playing different characters, encouraging yourself, encouraging you to look at things from their perspective and talking out those different perspectives, planning, using reasoning, sequencing to understand how things are connected, and collaboration, especially in the collaboration piece. You get genuine, organic communication and exchange that you just don't normally get oftentimes in the classroom. If I find that, for years I would give my students group work. Okay, as a group, go do this task. One person does all the work. A couple people slide. A couple people maybe participate a little bit here and there. But their collaboration is sort of forced. Here it is genuine. They know their limits. They know their powers. They know their strengths, and then they work together to complete the task. And all of this is centered around that regulation I was talking about, that self-regulation, being able to maintain composure when conflicts sometimes don't come out well. Not everything is successful in the game, just like in real life, and being able to maintain composure, remain attentive to what people are saying, delaying those impulse reactions. The game is built around encouraging students to do that. And it's actually a really complete model. Like I said, I'm going to sound like a shill for them for a minute here. They don't pay me. They don't even know I'm using this program, but I really like it, and I think it works really well. This is just one page of the booklet that is part of the program, and in it, it tells you which of those 5 core capacities this particular scene will focus on, how you can encourage students to interact with those capacities. It gives you a small little sort of script, like an outline of a script you can use if you want to lean on that, but it's also flexible enough that you can kind of flex and vamp and kind of take it in a different route if you want to do it differently. It tells you how to shorten it or lengthen the time or make it easier, make it harder. All that and this is it. These 2 pages here is everything you need to know for that scene and support those students and get them engaging with one another and developing those skills. So it's really kind of a complete package. And then, of course, the next page is the next scene, and everything works. It ties together linearly until you have this great story of these students who become the heroes who save the day. Having said all of that for the good stuff, there are some challenges, obviously, to getting a program like this off the ground, and I'll share some of the ones that I've experienced. Time being one of them. Time is being one of those big challenges. You're competing. Any program that you want to introduce is going to compete with clubs, sports, homework, student dedication, and that really is probably the biggest piece. Is the students have to have the time because they have to come consistently. If you're building a story with other people, they need to be present in order to make sure that they are actually there and building that story. And because if they start having holes in their attendance, it makes it hard to have a genuinely flowing story. So just carving out that time and competing with other things that students wants to do is one of the challenges. Experience, some people would look at this and be like, I don't really know what Dungeons & Dragons is or role-playing games in general. I have no experience. This is not for me. But the truth is, yeah, there is a learning curve, but the curve isn't steep. And the game that I use, the Critical Core game, actually is built for people who have very little experience and knowledge, so it helps step you into it. I do recommend maybe watching some people play Dungeons & Dragons, playing it yourself a couple times or some other role-playing game to get an experience of what that game is like, and you can find those at game stores or just watch people online. You can even play games online with people and just tell them it's your first time. Most of the community is very, very happy to introduce you to it. Buying is probably the biggest challenge, however, aside from the time and dedication. Getting parents to, if the school requires parental permission for a student to join the activity, sometimes there can be a stigma, especially around role-playing games. There was certainly one decades ago, and there's a little, resistance to role-playing games sometimes, especially in more conservative communities. But the bigger stigma, I would say, is not really the role-playing game. It's that if you're inviting a student to be involved, maybe because of their potential social developments or social emotional learning developmental needs, a lot of parents don't actually like that stigma, especially in the upper schools, the high schools, where they're very close to university. And they're worried that label is going to be attached to their kid, and then the university is going to find out about it. That's actually the biggest stigma that I've run up against. Sometimes you get trouble from buying from the administration, especially if there's parental pushback. But I found that a lot of administrations I've talked to have been, they would welcome something like this, especially for the students who aren't finding a fit anywhere else. One of the other problems I've had is that it is a small group, and especially if you're, looking to have it be part of your pay structure, you're running a club and therefore you get paid for that. Is 5 to 7 students enough? I mean, you could run a group of 5 to 7 on Tuesday and a different one on Thursday and a different one on Friday, and maybe that can make it work. But it is only 5 to 7 students, more than 7, and it's hard to get everybody the opportunity to really talk and contribute and listen to one another. Counselors, maybe you need a counselor. Sometimes the counselors may not be available, and sometimes if it's required, they may not have the training that people would want them, to have working with students with ASD. However, despite these challenges, I would say that I've had enormous success at this program. The kids are super excited about it. They love to come and play with their friends. I'd love to come every Thursday. They're just like, oh my God, it's Thursday. I can't wait. Let's do this. And they come in with an excitement that I see in few other things at the school. On top of that, they're building new friendships. Because I pull from a variety of different groups, social groups that wouldn't normally mix, they're mixing now. Then because they're encouraged to interact with one another, listen to one another, talk to one another, support one another, they're building, they're building friendships that they wouldn't have normally built along the way. And I'm watching them continue those friendships and those conversations outside of the classroom, which has been incredibly rewarding. And then, of course, on top of all of that, the development. The students genuinely talk about the development and how what they're learning in the project, they're transferring into the classroom and into their social life. So the development is showing to be effective beyond the group. And of course, the obligatory testimonials here. I had a 9th grade student, Isabel. She has executive functioning disorder and had a really, really difficult time planning. But what she talks about is how for her, in the game, it wasn't planning, it was battle strategy. And it was just that difference of thinking about it actually made it easier for her to do, and doing it repeatedly helped build a habit that she was then able to transfer out into the academic and study skills. And so what she was learning in the project, being able to be transferred out. Nicholas, who's 10th grade, actually is a student level 1 ASD. He genuinely called the program therapeutic. He said it burned off a lot of his excess energy, and he found himself to be a lot more calm and focused in his classes, and therefore was able to not only do well academically, but interact in a more a calmer way with others, so that he wasn't often seen as sort of the strange kid in the classroom. And so, there are challenges, but I find the successes to be way, way worth it. This is my Level Up program. This is what I've been doing for a few years now. I'm super excited about it. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions at all, or would like to reach out to me to ask me questions, I can be reached at my email address there. The website is actually for my gamification of my curriculum piece, but there's some information there on some of my sources and my research, so you can access that there as well. Not really so much on social media. They're there, but I don't check it very often because I'm just overwhelmed with work, and I have kids, and it's hard to be on social media with its toxicness these days. But email, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be happy to talk to you. Take care.